Hey, this is Scott Allen Miller with Sam IT, and today I'm going to talk about why everyone should think you're crazy. Great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ. This is one of the most important little kind of trite phrases you'll ever hear, and typically you only hear the first part because the second part is the part that actually matters and people don't like to talk about it. But the reality is that when people don't know what they're talking about, they tend to all say the same things, partially because they go with groupthink, partially because they just repeat what other people say, and partially because things like marketing and propaganda that are meant to mislead people are more effective when people don't know the subject matter or are not spending a lot of time thinking about it. You can go deep into psychology, but what's important is that the group, the crowd, the majority are rarely well informed or know what they're talking about. That goes for everything. When we move into something like IT, where we have huge numbers of users with very little training and very little expertise and a very complicated subject matter, the average gets worse. I believe it was George Carlin who said, think about how dumb the average person is and then remember that 50% of people are dumber than that. Take IT and we have a more dangerous scenario. We don't have a large number of people who are really competent in IT to start with. So IT's averages are dangerous, that it's easy to find huge majorities of people who don't have the first clue what they need to do in IT. I can safely assume that people watching this video don't fall into that category because those people who fall at average or below aren't people who seek out best practice and learning videos and resources in IT. So there's a really high chance that you, by the nature of watching this, are well above average. Not because you're watching me specifically, although I would like to think so, but because you're taking the effort to investigate and learn about these things. So, this is not an indictment of my audience. Of course, there may be people who don't know stuff in my audience. I don't know. But your percentage, your chances of being well above average are extremely high simply because you care. That alone is a massive factor. The average person doesn't care. But what we need to take away from things is there's a natural human reaction to feel that, everyone tells me I'm wrong, therefore I must be wrong. This may be true when everyone tells you you're a jerk. Yeah, you're probably a jerk. But not necessarily, but probably. But when people tell you you're wrong, that may be true if they're talking about something really simple that everybody knows really well, like common sense stuff, and everyone tells you you're wrong, there's a decent chance you're wrong. Still, look it up, verify. But when you get into something like IT, that everyone tells you you're wrong tells you nothing. Literally nothing. There's no value to it. At some point, and IT I think is really where this happens, there is a factor that if lots and lots of people believe the same thing, there is a certain value to that thought. But there's also a certain natural, if everyone thinks it, there's a negative value to it. In normal things like what is a good painting, the group agreement might be more powerful than the negativity of what just the average person thinks. But I think in IT we actually have the negative overtake the positive, so that the chances are if the majority of people do something, it's more likely to be wrong than it is to be correct, rather than the other way around with more typical consumer type items, or simpler things where everyone understands the problem domain. So, for example, and this is completely just some examples that are quick and easy to come up with, the majority of people still think you should split your OS onto a different array than your data, and that your data should be on RAID 5. Of course, these are things that are clearly wrong, yet the average person in IT, let alone the average person not in IT, still believes that this is the way to do it based off of, and we can pretty easily research this back and see why, because of misinformation or correct information that was given in the 1990s but was given with an explanation but memorized as rote and then repeated blindly for generations. Technology generations, not human generations. And so now, 20 years later, we can see how people repeating things they didn't understand for 20 years has created a huge market pressure of this is just how you do it, and all of those people learn from people who all believe that you repeat what you've heard, you don't look into why, and you don't consider that things may have changed. That's a pretty bad starting point for why our knowledge is the way we are. and explains why the majority of people believe something that is so obviously and easily shown to be incorrect. And it was even easily to be shown incorrect in the 1990s, because even when it was first produced as a good approach, it was explained why it was considered that way, so it should have been immediately obvious to anyone who learned it in the 1990s when it would have changed, because that was all given as part of the original explanation. Same thing with inverted pyramids of doom and SAN for high availability. People just assume, because every vendor says it, that it must be correct. Yet we know it's not correct. It's neither logical, it doesn't make common sense. You can run the numbers, you can run the risk, you can do all the complex math, or you can just look at the common sense. It's very easy to see that this is not the standard solution anyone should be deploying. Of course there's use cases for it, just like there is for split arrays and RAID 5, but they're very, very rare. SAN's not quite as rare as those, but it's rare, and it shouldn't be the knee-jerk reaction, yet we know it is by both vendors and IT professionals. The average IT professional will jump to this as simply the thing you do, without even offering other alternatives, which is weird, because there's things that should be the obvious alternatives that you started with, not that you ended with. And yet, that isn't how it works. So we know, again, the majority actually causes bad information, because there are always vendors and people looking to take advantage of the majority. They're easy to manipulate. So in something like IT, where the technology is that much harder, it is that much easier to manipulate, and because it's a business arena, the opportunity, the value to misleading people in IT is extremely high. And so people do it all the time. And they do it to each other because, for all the reasons we talk about in lots of other videos, if you've made bad decisions or you've made decisions, good or bad, it is in your emotional interest at a minimum to have lots of other people do the same things too. Groupthink is a real thing, and often people use it as an excuse, and a lot of people who are also using it as an excuse will accept it as an excuse as to why someone has done a bad job or made a bad decision because, well, everyone else did it. But we know if all of your friends jump off a bridge, you probably shouldn't jump off too. Now, if all your friends jump off a bridge, you may want to consider jumping off the bridge. It doesn't mean that just because it's a bridge or just because your friends did it that you shouldn't do it. You should evaluate if you want to join them in jumping off the bridge. But you shouldn't jump off the bridge blindly. And that's the problem that we have, is that the expectation in much of life and in IT is that the majority of people expect that you will do what the majority does because the majority does it. And that itself is an anti-best practice. That is just human foolishness, and it should be avoided. Because of this, if you are truly thinking about things as you should, if you're investigating, if you're interested, if you're passionate, and you're really digging into things, the majority of people are going to think you're crazy because you're going against the majority. And because they're not evaluating things and only look at them based on do lots of people do them or do lots of people not do them, their ability to gauge your craziness isn't based on whether you're logical, whether your answers are correct, whether you're making good decisions, whether you're doing the right thing for your business or your career. It's only based on, is it something they've seen other people do? If you come from a background of never evaluating or not understanding how to evaluate or not even knowing that you should be evaluating your decisions and how things work and thinking about things, and think that everything can just be boiled down to doing what everyone else does, then of course the concept of someone thinking things through, having logical decisions, being smart and well-researched doesn't even make sense to them. And even the idea of them trying to explain your logic won't make any sense, because they'll just say, but most people don't do that. And to them, that may even be they may think that's a rational argument. If that's all you do, that's all you know. I know this is a tough one, and I know we didn't really get into IT in this talk, but I think it's something that people need to understand, is that if you're doing a good job, you will almost certainly face continuous pressure that what you're doing is crazy. And that's how you know it's right. Not really. It's how you know it's not wrong. If you're doing the right thing, you will be called crazy. If you're doing the wrong thing, you might also be called crazy. But the one thing we know is that if you're considered to be good by the majority, you're doing the wrong thing, because the majority has, one, no idea, and two, no interest in doing the right thing. Thanks for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe, comment below, and congratulate yourself for joining the elite in people who actually care and take the time to research and think and produce logic for what they're doing. And if you want to sponsor us here on Sam IT, you can do so on Patreon.